Beethoven finished his Second Symphony while he was staying at Heiligenstadt in 1802. According to the musicologist Maynard Solomon, this was a period of crisis and creativity for the composer. If the First Symphony announced Beethoven's seriousness of intent as a composer, it was the immense popularity of his ballet, The Creatures of Prometheus, that helped to generate international interest in his music. By the way, as we'll see in the next video, Beethoven would recycle this tune in his Third Symphony. Professionally, Beethoven was highly productive and successful. He received more commissions than he could handle, and he was working on multiple compositions simultaneously. But few people at the time were aware that Beethoven's intense creative activity and growing professional recognition also coincided with a personal crisis of profound implications. The seriousness of his deafness was becoming apparent to him. Beethoven began experiencing hearing loss around the year 1796, and his condition was getting worse. By the summer of 1801, he revealed his anxiety regarding his condition to his close friends. Beethoven's physician recommended that he spare his hearing as much as possible and spend some time in the countryside. Accordingly, Beethoven set off for Heiligenstadt in April 1802. It was here that Beethoven wrote the poignant document now known as the Heiligenstadt Testament, which he apparently kept to himself throughout his life and which was found among his private papers after his death. Addressed to Beethoven's brothers, the Heiligenstadt Testament describes how his deafness drove him to contemplate suicide. Nevertheless, his art held him back. There is definitely something deeply bittersweet about Beethoven's situation at the time. Just as his artistic promise was becoming fulfilled, just as his career was truly taking off, he was tormented by the foreboding possibility that all of it would come crashing down sooner or later. As Charles Dickens could have described it quite aptly, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think that the Second Symphony, in its richness of content and mercurial contrast within and between movements, reflects this state of psychological volatility. Overall, mode mixture, which in the case of this symphony primarily involves borrowing chords from the parallel minor, is an important feature that contributes much to the musical drama. Also listen for C natural and its enharmonic reinterpretation as B sharp. This pitch is like the instigator that takes the music to the realm of F sharp minor, the key traditionally associated with purgatorial suffering. On a related note, the mediant, by which I refer to both F sharp minor and F sharp major, functions as a subversive force throughout the symphony. The first movement begins with a substantial, slow introduction, almost 3 times longer than that of the First Symphony. There is no harmonic ambiguity here. A strong unison D is announced right away in full orchestra, setting the tone for this powerfully direct and dramatic movement. From measure 10 onwards, Beethoven already starts to explore harmonies from the parallel minor. This exploration eventually culminates in a forceful D minor arpeggiation in measure 23. this moment remarkably anticipates the Ninth Symphony by 22 years. Over the course of the movement, such disquieting excursions into the minor mode will serve to add psychological depth to what would otherwise simply be upbeat, carefree music. Beginning in the low register, the main theme is essentially based on the tones of the tonic triad, using turn figures to connect these tones. For me, this theme seems to evoke the world of the comic opera. The transition builds on the main theme, extending it upwards to a prominent C natural that leads first to the subdominant, then the minor subdominant. Before we know it, the music has plunged into D minor. But the minor tonic is not our destination. With a kind of calculated fury, Beethoven unleashes the minor dominant. The vigorous bass line here is particularly effective. It seems to obscure the fact that we are essentially stuck on E, the dominant of the dominant. The subordinate's theme is in A major as we would expect, initially presenting a jaunty tune in the winds, seemingly oblivious to the drama that just transpired. However, the orchestra immediately answers with a forceful arpeggiation of F-sharp minor harmony. As we'll see, this F-sharp minor arpeggiation will be featured more prominently at the ends of the development section. The closing theme is also disturbed by flashes of minor harmony. Even at the moment when the dominant should be confirmed, the powerful D minor gesture from the introduction threatens to destabilize this confirmation. The development section begins with the main theme in D minor, as if fulfilling the promise of the parallel minor that was first offered in the introduction. Very quickly, the theme becomes fragmented and is treated sequentially. This culminates in an emphasis on C natural in the treble, as we previously encountered in the transition, but now more insistent than before. At first, the C natural resolves downwards to B as Beethoven brings back the subordinate's theme in G major, but very quickly this theme also falls apart into fragments. In measure 197, the persistent C natural returns, but now respelled as B sharp, which rises upwards to C sharp, launching into a fierce preoccupation with what appears to be the dominance of F sharp minor. You can see that the arpeggiation of F sharp minor here is like an amplification of what was originally presented in the subordinate theme. But after being prolonged for 16 measures, the C-sharp major harmony surreptitiously morphs into the dominant seventh of D major using C-sharp as the common tone. A single measure of unambiguous root position dominant seventh harmony is all that Beethoven gives us to usher in the recapitulation. Because of this, the return of the main theme in the tonic almost feels like an afterthought. Let's skip ahead to the coda, where something extraordinary happens. First of all, the instigating power of C natural still persists, but here it metastasizes into an alarmingly disorienting harmonic sequence called the omnibus progression. At one point, the chromatic voice leading even produces a passing D-sharp minor harmony. As you just heard, Beethoven ultimately manages to exit the omnibus progression via some expressive suspensions and find his way to a satisfying tonic resolution. Then the material from the main theme is stated one last time, finally succeeding in gloriously arpeggiating the tonic triad from D to D, rather than encountering the problematic C natural as before. Exquisitely refined and graceful, the second movement seems to inhabit a totally different world from the first movement. Cast in sonata form, we get a symmetrical phrase construction where almost every phrase is repeated and elaborated as if to ensure that each moment is fully savored. When we think of melodies of seemingly effortless grace and beauty, it is often Mozart rather than Beethoven who comes to mind. But the opening of this movement demonstrates that Beethoven too could write such beautiful melodies. In a sketchbook that Beethoven used around 1801, he jotted down an idea for a slow movement in G major, in which we can see some resemblance both to this opening theme and to another theme that would eventually find a home in the slow movement of the Fifth Symphony. Like in the first movement, the development section begins with the main theme in the tonic minor. It then proceeds to wander through a series of modulations that would not be out of place in Schubert's music. And curiously, the ends of the development section presents the same harmonies as the corresponding spots in the first movement, but these harmonies sound different because the tonic is now A major rather than D major. It's like we're offered a more amiable perspective on what has previously been a volatile moment. You'll recall that in the first symphony, the third movement was called a minuet but sounded like a scherzo. We find no such identity crisis in this symphony. The unambiguous scherzo is all about sudden contrast in dynamics, registers, harmonic colors, and orchestral colors. As in the first movement, mode mixture continues to be an important feature, especially in the second half of the scherzo. In contrast, the second half of the trio suddenly blares out F sharps and then bursts into an arpeggiation of F sharp major harmony, an example of secondary mixture with a kind of comical rudeness. In a way, this gesture is like a parody of the more serious F sharp minor moments in the first movement and, as we'll see, in the finale as well. Incidentally, the start of the trio seems to look ahead to the analogous spot in the scherzo of the Ninth Symphony. You can think of the finale as being in sonata rondo form, though it is perhaps more sonata-like than rondo-like. Contemporary critics found this music bizarre, wild, and shrill. We need only consider the main theme itself to understand why. It begins with a quirky little figure, featuring a huge gap between the initial hiccup and the shuddering that follows. As in the first movement, the development section begins with the main theme exploring the tonic minor. And it similarly ends by heavily emphasizing F sharp minor before correcting course towards D major at the last possible moment. The long coda is like a second development section. It also serves as a summary of the key issues that have been plaguing us throughout the symphony. First, both the main theme and subordinate theme are brought back. The former becomes suffused with a kind of reckless chromaticism that perhaps reminds us of the omnibus progression in the coda of the first movement. While the latter is tinged by minor mode inflections. The music builds to an expectant dominant seventh chord in first inversion. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, we get a quiet F sharp major harmony, a gentle reminder of the median's disruptive role in the symphony. Next, Beethoven deals with the problematic C natural, and in a way it almost feels like he's wrestling it into submission. And just as we think that everything has been said and done and we can all go home happy, a loud interruption on unison F sharp gives us pause. Ultimately, there would be 19 measures of solid tonic affirmation, as if to assure us that this interruption is just a bad joke that should not prevent us from enjoying a happy ending. Despite this, however, I can't help but feel that the F sharp and all the disruptive energy it represents somehow lingers still, as irreconcilable and unsettling as ever.
Thanks for watching.